history shows that it's not going to happen for a long time. It really is time for this issue to be addressed. We have the meters in place. You have a lot of usage data, and just look at the demand curve. It used to be 7 o'clock in the morning, demand went like this, and then dropped down 7 o'clock. Now it rises to about 11 o'clock, and with the solar that's been installed, it drops and does not reoccur until 4 p.m. when solar stops producing. You're trying to fill that valley and shave that later peak, and by doing it on a 3-hour basis, you're going to hit the mark. I think we've waited a long time for this to happen. In addition to a UI mentioned in one of its responses in EOE 213 that it cannot reprogram its meters over the air, remote reprogramming. I would note that in 2007, UI was before the authority and touted the benefit of remote reprogramming as one of the reasons to allow it to invest in smart meters. I would ask that you consider looking closely at a cost to reprogram meters if it doesn't happen. That would be simply an unfulfilled promise by the company. They were allowed to invest in the meters, and again, they provided that information. And finally, just quickly, and I haven't followed this as closely as maybe I should, but the non-bypassable FMCC charge for rate RT currently includes a bill credit of close to 7 cents, and that 7 cents is applied to the on-peak rate. I believe that charge is fully loaded for the on-peak period when it charges customers, and that's meant to create a price benefit for customers to shift to the off-peak. It might be appropriate that when a credit is issued, that the credit is applied to the off-peak rates, because to do otherwise, this reduces the price differential. It actually discourages people from using in the off-peak because you're dumbing down that price differential. So if you go with a 3-hour period, you're going to need a robust educational program, a sustained educational program. This change would take time. And knowing the recent media attention to rates, UI submitted a sample 3-hour rate in one of the responses. It's 79 cents peak for 3 hours, 26 cents off peak. Anybody gets a hold of a 79-cent rate, they're going to run with it, and there's going to be, here we go again, inaccurate information, another onerous rate increase. You've got to really educate customers how this rate would work. But again, that's it. I'm trying to run it through in 3 minutes, and probably went a little over. I included in my comments are some, I couldn't help myself, some potential additional discovery to follow up on the EOE questions. I'm going to submit this when I get home electronically, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marcellinus. Okay, anything further before we begin cross this morning? Okay, staying, and then we will resume cross-examination of this panel. Welcome back. I remind you that you're remain under oath, and we will resume cross with Mr. Athos.
Thank you. A few things that to finish off, and a couple of follow-ups on the economic development rate. We spoke yesterday about the potential to create the requested regulatory asset for the costs associated with implementation, and I thank you for that dialogue. I wanted to understand a little bit about the discounts and the regulatory asset, that's rationale and the like. It sounded like that what I heard would mention that you understand that that you haven't forecasted. I think of these in steps. Have you forecasted any additional load on the system for due to economic development rates?
No.
Okay. And it sounded like that the pricing of the economic development rate load would be such that it had to be above incremental costs, and thus it would have a contribution to fixed costs.
Only if necessary. Excuse me. Only if necessary, we would evaluate the expected revenues from the new customer addition and the expected cost, and determine whether the revenues exceed the marginal cost. If that were the case, then no contribution in aid of construction would be required.
No, I apologize. And maybe we we're thinking two different things. I'm talking about that there's a margin above incremental costs that would obviously in rate making vernacular go to a contribution to general fixed costs.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So now I want to understand if the rate making doesn't have this sales of a new economic development customer in, and therefore it doesn't have any expectation to have a margin from that customer. It sounds to me that that's incremental margin to the company.
No, my understanding of the proposal is that the revenues are also captured in this deferred asset or liability. So if it were B, where there's incremental revenues that exceed costs, it would be a regulatory liability, and that liability would be owed to customers in a future proceeding.
Okay, so that's helpful. So in the instance that the fact that you will not, I believe that the implementation is such that you will not have a discount bring somebody to a rate level that would be below the incremental cost to serve.
That's correct.
Okay, so then it strikes me that there is no lost revenue from discounting to as a result of the economic development rate to be rolled into a regulatory asset. That there's only the credit that you spoke about.
Well, I think the reason for the proposal is that there's unknowns about the level of investment that the company would need to make in order to facilitate the program. So do they need to make changes to their computer systems? Do they need, as you mentioned yesterday, additional full-time employees? Those are unknowns. So the proposal and the idea here is that for this first period only, there would be a regulatory treatment that captures both revenues and costs, which then in the next case could be, as I think you're suggesting here, rolled into kind of normal revenue requirements.
Well, I'm just, we spoke about cost yesterday, so now I'm just trying to talk about the revenue side, but I appreciate that reminder. But I just want to make sure that I understand. So you said that if there's, since there's additional sales, I think you said today, that and it's priced above incremental costs, that would be a regulatory liability because money is owed to the customers.
That's correct.
Okay. So under what circumstances would there be a regulatory asset on the revenue side that is that could be owed to the customer? I mean, owed to the company.
You could have commitments from, I think it would be a timing issue, frankly. You would have commitments from new customers to add to join the distribution system, but you would have to create this new, you could potentially have to create new department or new systems in advance, so you could incur a substantial amount of cost before the revenues were starting to accrue.
I'm not talking about cost.
Okay.
I'm asking about from the discount itself related to the revenue reduction. I believe the request, and you can correct me if I'm misunderstanding, that the request is to have an element of a regulatory asset be the amount of discount that was provided by the company.
It would have to be a regulatory account on the balance sheet. It could have an asset balance or a liability balance. So we're not saying that it's going to just have a debit balance that's owed to the company. So what we envisioned was putting all the costs that it requires to do this, startup costs and per contract or per tariff delivery cost into there, and then the revenues that are truly incremental would go into that same account. So to the extent that there'd likely be some expenses incurred upfront, the timing issue, and as time goes on, that the incremental revenues would then be added as a credit on the credit side of that. So eventually, there will likely be a credit balance in there once all the startup costs have been basically recovered.
Thank you. Um, we also spoke, we spoke yesterday about, I was wondering about the number of new customers, commercial industrial customers that are joining the system in a given year. And you mentioned that you only had available the net numbers of customers, I believe, and that was going down. So that it was not useful for the information for the question. Is there any coding of customers of when their accounts start? And essentially that you start recording billing data or start saving billing data on that customer, on that account?
Yes, each account has a couple of concepts. Each metered point and unmetered point too has a concept called point of delivery. And we know that when that point of delivery came on, it's not what we have to do is we have to do additional analysis. We have to pull all the point of deliveries and see when they start. So as opposed to the actual customer count, which we do each month, and it's easy to look from one month to the next to take the difference between the total customer count. To get the number of new point of deliveries or PODs, we'll have to go back in time and do through querying and other analysis, look at the incremental ones. We know when they are. We know we'll have to search for the first date, but that requires quite a bit, which we can do in a late file, if that would be useful.
Not necessarily. I just want to understand the capability. Now, the other part of that conversation was the fact that I believe it might have been said that you're losing a certain percentage or a number of net industrials that is going down each year for like the last decade. Do you remember what reference that whether you use like, I think there was a 10 in there, but I don't remember whether it's 10 customers or 10% or something like that you might have used.
No, I think I said, subject to check, that it's been going down for at least 10 years.
Okay, that was probably, okay. So now, can you do you think that the existence of a business retention application for an economic development rate may have reduced that number of, made the reduction smaller, to not use the same word twice?
I don't know. We don't have any data on that. We can't make that statement whether it would have reduced those numbers or not.
So can you explain to me, help me understand why you wouldn't want the capability of, in the right circumstances, of having a business retention oriented part of an economic development rate available to you to potentially reduce that number?
Well, by definition, a retention economic development will create a subsidy as opposed to a growth economic development tariff. And that subsidy is because you're going to reduce a rate from an existing customer from one level to a lower level. That differential must be made up from all of the remaining customers.
Okay,
The question, I believe, having said that, the question is, would that be enough to retain that customer as opposed to losing the entire load? And I think that would be a lot of speculation. And I don't know if the company or myself could really venture a guess on how effective that would be.
Okay, that's the second part there is helpful for my question. I'm not sure if I agree with the premise of their it being existing load, the discount, if in fact they were in the customer group, that maybe you can comment on this, if they kind of would, if you found the customers that were going to disappear, that are disappearing each year over the last decade, why that is why you consider that a subsidy being created when you give a discount as opposed to new load.
I can speak to Mr. Athos. I can speak to the customer count on the industrials. When we do the forecast, right, we have a decade plus, 12 years of monthly customer counts on the industrial class, and then we use statistical models to estimate what the future load is based on, in this particular case, exponential smoothing. For the last several years, we've been averaging losing about 30 to 40 industrials per year. So that trend has been down. And then based on what Mr. Kolka and your previous question is, that's a net number. Because the reason we do that forecast is we then apply the various service class basics, customer charges, and then the volumetric or demand type rates to get a revenue forecast. Based on your other question is on that turnover, that's a net number. Is it potentially that we are losing 60 customers a year, but gaining 20 for a net minus 40? And why are those customers leaving? That type of analysis has not been done. And that type of analysis, we would need to have an individual customer, right? All 900, 800 customers and figure out their start date, their end date, why they left, potentially with surveys and the like. But I think that was the type of analysis that your previous question was referring to. Is that correct?
Somewhat. I'm all set with that. Has the company been engaged at the account executive level or any other level with the customers that have stopped taking service on the industrial side? Let's just focus there for a moment. Engaged with the customer or with the Department of Economic and Community Development and maybe even the towns to understand if there was something that could be essentially done to keep the customer active on the system.
For actual communication, that question would need to go to the Economic Development Group, which we could take back as a late file. I don't know if they're going to appear, but we could find out what they do to help manage the customers. As for like an exit survey, is that something you're asking about? What we would ask them if?
No, I was trying to have the circumstance of an exit be avoided.
I think that's a much deeper dive and a much more resource intensive activity. And their electric bill is going to be one facet of their decision to locate. And these are industrial customers, so they can locate probably anywhere. Electricity price is just one. Labor price, land price, climate. There's too many things to say that just an economic or a retention rate would have kept people from going. We just don't know.
If I could have a late file that's a little bit general, I just would like to do it. If the late file exhibit could be, please describe the type and scope of work that the account executives get involved in typically with the industrial customers, including industrial customers that have ended up leaving the system, and describe whether or not there is any coordination, any interaction with the Department of Economic Development and Economic Community Development as by the account executives which might have preempted the need to exit.
So that's late file exhibit 8.
So let me just make sure I understand the eligibility of customers. We had a good discussion about the new customers and other things, but I just wanted to make sure I was kind of clear. So new industrial customers would be a great prototype for eligibility for as a new customer for the economic development rate, provided they had employment or investment associated with them.
And they were not transferring from within the UI service territory. Yes, I would agree.
Okay, would new commercial customers be able to any new commercial customers be able to qualify for again, let's just take the issue of moving completely out and brand new to the UI system. Would they have the ability to get be eligible for the economic development discount?
Yes. In the first sentence of the availability clause, it reads available to non-residential customers, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so a greenfield restaurant would potentially be eligible for the economic development rate.
That's correct.
Okay. Would a government account be eligible for a economic development rate at some point?
There's no restriction in the tariff. Government accounts are either rate GST or rate LPT in the company's tariffs. But there would need to be a demonstration that that government entity needed that incentive to locate in the area. They'd be treated with the same requirements to demonstrate that they needed that as all the other customers.
Let me then backtrack a little bit. So the industrial customer that's coming in, brand new industrial customer that's building a greenfield building, so it's not make it nice and clean and hypothetical. Besides coming, arranging for service, other stuff, and if they're industrial that supplies all over the United States, do you have to go through the evaluation? Are you going to go through the evaluation that shows that the discount was material in making them come to Connecticut?
I believe it, although no specific criteria has been developed yet, because we're still in the infancy of designing this program. There would have to be a demonstration somehow, some way that they needed this to move in. We had a free rider discussion yesterday. We're going to have to do something to make sure that the customer needs that EDR to move in. And that would apply to any customer who is applying for this. And we don't distinguish in the tariffs between industrial, commercial, and institutional customers. So they'll all have to go through the same process.
Okay. So just to make sure, you've clarified this for me so I just make sure my takeaway is correct. So that as opposed to a new customer saying, "Hey, I've built my little 100 people shop on this formerly piece of farmland property, and I meet the criteria for employment, and assuming and the proposed rates that they would get it's all incremental load, so they obviously the brand new customer, they are not automatically then eligible as soon as you count the number of employees for the economic development rates.
So there are two additional requirements, and they're in the terms and condition portion of the tariff.
Mhm.
The first is that all subscribers must agree to commit to the implementation of one or more energy efficiency, peak demand response, or grid modernization measures. It's number one. And then number two, and I'll paraphrase, the company in its sole discretion can deny it if it if it's uneconomical to serve that customer. So if there's some system reason. We touched upon this yesterday. You brought up a good point about whether the company has discretion to allow or not. And my response is that the company has the sole discretion to do that. In my opinion, I think that this language could be embellished to be more clear about that point and to also support the thoughts that Mr. Kolka just testified to. So I think that there could be some additional language added there.
Okay, couple of the quick questions. Did you consult with the Department of Economic and Community Development on the on any aspects of the proposed rate, including the amount of discount?
So we did the test. Get a response. Although we did not make that connection, we did reach out to DECD and we did not receive a response.
Thank you.
Okay, turning now to rate design related questions. Company prepared a response that I believe Mr. Marcellinus brought up, interrogatory to EOE 213. I have a number of questions related to that. I'm going to quote from one of the responses. Between 2007 and 2021, the ISO New England annual system peak has occurred exclusively between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. Hours ending 15 and hours ending 18 during a weekday in the month of either June, July, or August. You recall that response?
I do.
Wouldn't this suggest that the hours of noon to 8 p.m. on weekdays could be shortened?
Based on this and what's been going on in the AMI docket 17-1203 REO2, where a lot of this material has been treated in more detail, then yes, there could be an adjustment to the time of day, the hours and the on-peak time of day periods.
There's in one of the recent EV dockets, I think it was 21-08-06. I believe that UI proposed and Pura approved for EVs a managed charging window from 3 to 9 p.m. Is that one possibility for a slightly shorter but certainly moved on-peak period?
It's a possibility, yes.
Thank you. Would a shorter on-peak hours window sharpen the price signal of particularly the
Yes.
on-peak time of use rates?
Yes, it would increase the on-peak time of use rate from its current 8 hours. If we did it in a revenue neutral design, yes.
Yeah, and in part, that's because the actual rate would increase commensurately with the shorter period.
Yes, there's fewer kilowatt hours in that shorter period. We'd have to collect the revenue over that period in the same revenue, as long as we did it revenue neutral. We're going to collect the same on-peak revenues and off-peak revenues that we're collecting today. Fewer hours on peak, fewer kilowatt hours, same amount in the revenue in the numerator. And so the price is going to have to go up. Consequently, the off-peak price would go down because we're collecting the same amount over more kilowatt hours.
Yep, to keep it revenue neutral. Would a shorter on-peak hours window result in a consumption price response, often termed as price elasticity, from residential customers that reduces consumption and therefore distribution system loadings during this on-peak period?
Ideally, but do we have actual elasticity estimates.
No, that would be the assumption, but until we actually saw, right? We have a price signal and it's further encouraging customers to control their load to the off-peak hours. Presumably, right, that would be the assumption is that there's an elasticity effect driving that customer behavior.
And that, whether or not the company did it, that consumption price response could be quantified, correct?
Yeah, with enough data, we could quantify that. Yeah.
Has the company, via its econometric load and sales forecasts, or in perhaps any separate analysis, attempted recently to quantify that price elasticity of consumption?
The price elasticity derived directly from the residential models. We don't model R and RT separately. We model total residential load. So we have a total all-in residential bundled price deflated for inflation, and the elasticity from that model, if I recall correctly, is minus 0.31, which is in the normal expected range. But we haven't done the hourly elasticity effects that you're suggesting, given that we don't have that type of data available.
Thank you. Can you provide an indication of the labor effort, the cost, or other practical considerations in altering the company's on-peak time of use period?
We need the witness, Benjamin Lobick, who is on this on the witness list on EOE 213. He would have to answer that, and he is unavailable for the next week or two. So we can take that as a late file.
Please do. Thank you, Mr. Koka.
I'm sorry, 1 second. Your witness is not available to, I mean, the company has the burden here, so if the witness is not available, then.
Yeah, Chair Gillette, on this response, we have the three primary cost of service witnesses from the company. Mr. Lobick was an additional subject matter expert, so our request would be if we could take this back as a late filed exhibit. We were just trying to, you saw the number of additional folks. We were just trying to make the panels manageable. So getting to a level of detail here where we can probably effectively address this in a late file.
Okay, can you restate the prompt? I'm not convinced yet that the company should have the opportunity to supplement through a late file. So I need the response stated, please.
Yes, Madam Chair. I was asking about the company's, if they could provide an indication of the labor effort, the cost, or any other practical considerations in altering its on-peak time of use period.
To clarify, these would be the estimated costs to affect the change in the on-peak period.
That's correct.
Altering time of use.
There may be a detailed discussion of that in the AMI docket.
Okay, I appreciate that. The AMI docket evidence is not entered into here. So what interrogatory was this EOE, which please?
213.
213. Okay, and is that the request that was made in that interrogatory and the company did not respond to it?
No, that's not our reading of that question. I think this was a level of detail that Mr. Farinars was asking the company to provide, in terms of additional analysis.
Okay.
At least that was my take on it.
I don't have the response in front of me, but I believe, subject to check, that Mr. Benoit is correct.
Okay, very good. Then we will make this late file exhibit 9.
Should the company's on-peak time of use period and any seasonal rate differentials align across all functions, including generation, transmission, distribution, and system benefits?
I, I don't think it's appropriate to use the same allocator across all those different rate components because they have, the costs are derived differently. SBC, that is primarily assistance for low income and income eligible customers. So that doesn't have the same type of time of day costing as, say, the transmission system does.
Yeah, I didn't ask about allocators. I asked about the rates themselves for purposes of price signaling. So I appreciate what you're saying about system benefits charges, but as a just a practical price signaling matter, would it be more helpful to consumers to know that the full cost of any service to them from the company was signaled in the same manner in terms of a consistent on and off peak rate?
No, I don't agree that those, the public benefits charges, the SBC, in particular, should not be time of day differentiated.
Okay, what about the generation, transmission, and distribution functions?
The generation, the default generation function, standard service, is by regulatory rule differentiated. Right now for rate RT, there's a 3.5 cent price differential between on and off peak embedded in the rates. And for GST and LPT, it's 3 cents per kWh.
And what are those periods that the higher prices pertain to? What's the window?
The on-peak period for rate GST and rate LPT is 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And for rate RT is noon to 8 p.m.
Thank you. And I'll be getting to GS and GST momentarily. Could such a realignment in the on-peak time of use period or any changes to it and or seasonal rate differentials be implemented in this case or in the next case? What would be the, assuming the company were ordered to do so, what would be the practical timing requirements here, including, for instance, to forewarn customers or to, educate them to the change?
The customer education component, I would defer to the customer service panel, who will be appearing here later. As for implementing the metering, that is, I believe that's been discussed in the AMI docket. There's a lot of information in the AMI docket looking specifically at these items, and we're ordered in that docket to look at numerous time of day features that, and part of that is the necessary effort and timing and cost to reprogram the hours.
And that reprogramming of meters, of billing
Meters, yes.
systems?
Yes.
It, as a practical matter, should existing, again, we're on the RT rate, the residential time of use rates, be grandfathered in order to avoid confusion or potential rate shocks?
I don't think this should be grandfathered into it. It should be transitioned smoothly from old hours to new hours.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. In that same EOE 213 interrogatory response, company indicated, quote, the UI system peak may not coincide with the ISO New England system peak. For example, the ISO New England 2021 annual system peak occurred between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. on June 29th, 2021, whereas the UI's 2021 annual system peak occurred between 5 PM and 6 PM on June 30th, 2021. So a day later and an hour difference. Is that correct?
Correct.
So again, wouldn't this suggest that the residential time of use tariffs that specify on-peak hours of noon to 8 PM could be shortened?
They certainly could be shortened. I don't know to exactly which set of hours.
Thank you.
Once again, this is something that we have looked at in the AMI docket in much more detail.
In that same interrogatory response, the company admitted that, quote, having a seasonal price differential with higher summer rates would send the price signal that available summer capacity is more scarce than available winter capacity. Do you recall that response?
I do.
If so, why aren't residential distribution rates also seasonally differentiated?
They were seasonally differentiated until we had the big rate design case that was in our 2005 rate case. The last time significant rate design was done was in docket 050604. And there was a supplemental order that treated rate design. And then there was a couple of reopeners, in particular reopener 4, that handled rate design also. Most of the current rate design that we have right now resulted from changes that were done in either the supplemental 050604 decision or through the reopener 4 to that decision.
Just briefly tell me about that reopener 4. Was that something that Pura ordered or something the company proposed?
I believe it was due to Public Act 07242 that came about and required a number of different things that the utilities do.
Thank you, Mr. Kolka. So if residential distribution rates or perhaps other function rates were seasonally differentiated, would the company expect a consumption price response from residential customers that reduces consumption and therefore distribution system loadings during the scarcer capacity summer period?
It could. In principle, yes. A higher price would result in lower consumption, except that customers can move to radar. And so anything we do there can be undone by migration between radar. We have this migration issue between R and RT that can go either way.
Thank you. Moving to commercial rate design, UI filed a document E-1.0-C. For the commercial GS and GST classes, can you confirm that the company is proposing distribution rates, including both demand charges per kW and per kWh, that are neither time of use nor seasonally differentiated?
Distribution rate, correct. Distribution rates are no longer time of day, nor are they seasonally differentiated. And that's what we propose to maintain in this case.
And I think you're going to refer again back to at one time they were, but I'll ask it anyway. So given that response, that interrogatory response, can you tell us why they are not?
Through the rate design done back in the 2006 through 2008 era, the time of day and seasonal differences were taken out of distribution where they had been previously and put into transmission and non-bypassable FMCC where they are today. The time of day differentials still exist in transmission and non-bypassable.
Is UI's distribution capacity more utilized and or more stressed during on-peak periods?
Well, that may be a question for engineering, but I think in general, any distribution system is more stressed when it gets to higher loads.
Thank you. Is this distribution capacity more utilized or more stressed during the summer?
The summer loads are higher than the winter loads. The summer peak loads are higher than the winter peak loads.
So given your interrogatory response in EOE 213 and referring to when both ISO New England's system peaks and the UI distribution system peaks, could the on-peak window for rate GST be shortened, say to begin later than 10 a.m. in order to produce a sharper price signal and induce a better consumption response?
Yes.
Just hypothetically here, given what you noted in that interrogatory response, would something like 2 to 6 p.m. sharpen that price signal and be relatively probable that you'll capture the system peaks?
Two to 6 p.m. is likely going to capture the system peaks.
Referring to rate GST, can you explain why distribution demand rates are seasonally undifferentiated, but the minimum bill is seasonally differentiated?
We eliminated the seasonal differential on July 1st, 2021. We didn't do any analysis on the minimum bill distribution rates at that time. But I believe that they probably should be undifferentiated and set equal to the distribution KW charge.
And just as a practical matter, if the distribution demand rates were seasonally differentiated again, the minimum bill should also be, and I put another way, because I think you indicated just now that they're not, and so perhaps the minimum bill should also be seasonally undifferentiated, but essentially, should they line up, basically?
Yes, I feel that the minimum bill KW should be exact, the price should be exactly equal to the actual base distribution KW price.
Thank you. For both rates GS and GST, can you explain the reasoning behind distribution rates that have both a demand charge per KW and a separate charge per KWH?
That's a rate design that's been around for a long time. We have not proposed to change that. I know that in other dockets, that exact proposal to eliminate the KWH charge to these general service customers was proposed. It is not generally taking, it's not been acceptable to numerous parties to eliminate the KWH charge for distribution. So we did not propose to do that.
Can you expand on that? Which parties found it unacceptable?
That's in a different docket. And so we would have to take a late file back to expound upon that more. But that is, it generally takes away considerable value from net metering, because net metering is done on an energy basis. And if we reduce the energy charges, then that reduces the value to net metering. And that was the gist of what happened in the other case.
Thank you. For rate GST alone, would a superior consumption response be induced by having a larger relative per KW demand charge, or perhaps solely a per KW demand charge?
Can you repeat that first part of that question, please?
Yes, I'm focusing in on rate GST, and I'm wondering whether you would get a better consumption response by having a larger relative per KW demand charge. That is relative to the split between per KW and per KWH demand charges, or perhaps solely a per KW demand charge.
It depends on the type of response that one is looking for. If we were to increase the KW charge and reduce the KWH charge, high load factor customers will pay less. Low load factor customers will pay more. We can't necessarily say, I believe we can't a priori say which way that's going to go. If for high load factor customers, their total bill would go down. So they may consume more just if there is that relationship between lower price, higher consumption. And it could possibly by principle go the other way. For low load factor customers, they'll be paying a much higher average per kWh. So their bill would go up. You know, their consumption could go down depending on the elasticity. If the elasticity is low, there'll be very little change.
So I think I heard you say, regardless of whether their bill increases or not, or whether high load factor customers benefit or low load factor customers end up paying more. I was asking about the price response. Would you agree in either case that the signal has been sharpened with a solely per kW demand charge or a relatively larger one compared to the per kWh charge?
I don't know what sharpen means. Can you put a little context around
Sure. Would the impetus to reduce demand during the period when those demand charges apply, would that impetus be greater with a?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, well, anything that'll raise the price will tend to lower the consumption, all other things being equal. Once again, the size of that response depend on the elasticity of the load.
Understood. Can you confirm that UI's rate GS applies to commercial customers with a consistent monthly demand of less than 500 kW?
That is the restriction for rate GS is 100 kW.
It's now 100? Okay, thank you. And that compares to Eversource's Connecticut rate 30A. I think they have a demand threshold of 200 kW or less, and I'm not asking you to confirm or deny that. I'm just, if yours is 100 kW or less and theirs is 200, essentially capturing the same kinds of customers, are you not?
I can't say that for sure. I don't, their rate structure is different than ours, and they may have rates that are available to other types of customers that we don't. We have a very simple rate structure, GS, GST, and LPT. I know that Eversource has numerous more non-residential rates than UI does. So I hesitate to make any one-to-one correspondence between those.
Okay. Does the mix of UI's small commercial customers, the GS type customers, tend to cluster mostly in that 200 kW or less, or is it, is it 100 kW or less? I'm sorry, 100 kW or less, or is it 10 kW less? Do you have any sense of the distribution of demands within that class?
The distributions, I don't have like a frequency distribution curve of those. We can calculate what the average KW per customer is by looking at our umbrella filing that has for each rate schedule, the total number of kilowatt hours, total number of KW, and the number of customers. So we can get on a class basis, we can get average KW, average KWH, average load factor. For that particular type of frequency distribution, if it was something that would be very useful, we could develop it. But I think the average is going to be around 30 kW for rate GS. But once again, we can calculate that directly from the umbrella filing.
So you could produce that frequency distribution you're just referring to?
We can, it'll take, that could be done as a late file if it would be useful. It's quite a bit of work, but we can do it. If you think that'd be useful to have.
No, we're not going to ask for that. Thank you. Has the company looked at across GS and GST customers and that range of demands that apply in both customer classes? Has the company recently looked at whether or not the smaller customers are essentially covered under that GS rate? And let me restate this. Have you looked at the demand thresholds lately? I think you said it was GS was 100 kW or less. Have you looked at whether or not that and your customer mix, that cutoff point is appropriate?
We have not.
Okay. That's all I had. I'm going to ask if my colleagues have any follow-up. Yes, Mr. Skarzinski. You want my seat?
We're okay, John. Okay, yeah, no, take stance. Great. Good morning, panel. Rich Skarzinski, Revenue Requirements Unit, Pure staff. Just have a few questions. I'd like to start by revisiting a little bit of our discussion yesterday, Mr. Kalka, in terms of the results of the cost study, in terms of residential rates and rate RT. Is it fair to say, I think how I heard it yesterday was the results of the study for residential class R were different in terms of contribution to rate of return than prior studies somewhat. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then we also talked a lot yesterday and used the word migration and concerns about that with pricing signals between rate R and RT. Fair statement?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So I was thinking about this a little bit last night, and in terms of, can you give me an idea in terms of the number of customers who have, let me rephrase that. Any changes in rate RT have you seen over the last few years? And I'll just set it up a little bit. I took a real quick look at one of the E exhibits from 160604. It's a E2.2. And I just took the basic service charge divided by 12 to get a ballpark number of customers from that time period, which I believe 160604 was a 2015 test year. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then compared that to the equivalent exhibit in this case. Is it fair to say I came up with roughly about a 5% decrease from rate in rate RT customers, roughly? Would you know that or?
Well, yeah, we have the full record on that number. That seems like it's a reasonable number, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay, just kind of looking for a ballpark. I'm thinking of hydraulics in that way in this line of questioning, and at the same time taking a similar look using those two exhibits for rate R. I see a slight increase compared from 2015 and roughly it's under 3%.
Mhm.
Came out with about 2.7. Again, just using these exhibits, I'm sure there might even be more precise things to date now, but I'm just trying to get a rough estimate of the hydraulic. And here's where I'm going with it is it, one other thing I heard yesterday was in terms of the results for residential R, that you didn't really have time to do a deep dive and to really, why did it come out differently? Is that fair?
Yes, when we saw the results of the cost of service study, we were well on to our way of determining the rates and the case, correct?
Understood. Okay. Is it possible, just in terms of hydraulics, that when you look at the change in customers, a decrease in rate RT customers and an increase in residential class R customers, and you transform the cost allocation to those rate classes, wouldn't that have an impact on the results to some degree? I'm not saying it's the be all end all, but to me, there's enough play in those two number of customers. Therefore, the cost underlying those would shift more to residential than rate RT.
Well, on a per customer basis, I feel that the difference between R and RT is most likely due to the average monthly consumption per customer. So it's inherent in any type of cost allocation, cost recovery that customer charges, and we're restricted into what we can collect through a fixed charge to the MRCC. So anything that is allocated in the cost of service study based on customer count, above that and minimum system, minimum intercept, all those costs beyond the 4 statutory functions in the MRCC, they have to be recovered on a volumetric basis. And what we've seen also, if you compare those exhibits like you have and look at the average consumption per customer, you'll see that rate R customers are using considerably less per month than rate RT customers. But they face the same basic service charge. So when that happens, you're seeing more and more customer-related costs being recovered from smaller amounts of volumetric, on a volumetric basis. So that's why if we were to set R and RT, and you bring up a good point that, yes, when these customers are in the test year, they have what they have in the test year, in their loads and in their behavior and their load shapes. That changes over time. So we change that basically once a year in all the other rate components because we use the load research and we set those rates every year in the RAM docket. But these rates are going to be set for years at a time until sometime in the future. So we are coding in what happened in the test year to live long into the future. So that point where you brought up that there could be changes just because of some migration going in between, there could be. Customers migrating from one rate schedule to another will bring their characteristics into that other rate schedule.
Okay, and then just to follow up on that real quick so I think what I'm hearing in terms of the usage changes and differential, the amount of usage between the two classes of customers, to some extent that feeds into the cost allocation and have the impact ultimately of that differential that you see in this cost study compared to prior ones, to some extent, generalizing. Fair?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. I can move past that now. Appreciate that. I just have some general questions in terms of the cost of service study. And you just touched on it, Mr. Culkin. I'll be quick. I think I'm going to use less time, by the way. You mentioned, I just want to confirm that in 160604, UI used the minimum intercept cost of service methodology, correct?
Correct.
And in 220808, it is the minimum systems methodology, correct?
That's correct.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Remo. And really, I'm kind of direct some questions to you. I just want to understand a few things. Can you just briefly summarize the similarities and or differences between the two? Are they similar?
Conceptually, we are trying to get to, like same sort of classification between customer and demand, but the methodology is different in terms of how you go about conducting the studies.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit? Give examples of how different it is?
Yeah, so I mean, on a zero intercept study tries to estimate a cost of a distribution asset that cannot carry any load versus a minimum system. You're trying to design a system using the minimum size asset currently being installed. So there's a little bit of, like size, like what one is trying to get at is no load situation, the zero intercept, versus the minimum system is using the minimum size asset currently being used.
Okay. And
What's more conceptual?
so is it fair in both cases, it's somewhat of a hypothetical scenario to get the lowest cost to provide the service? I don't know if I'm saying the last part right, but just trying to understand.
I guess I won't necessarily categorize it as lowest cost, but yeah, it is hypothetical. But in my view, I think zero intercept is much more hypothetical because we're trying to get to a conductor or transformer that can carry no load at all, and you're trying to estimate a cost using cost data you have for other sizes. Again, there's no zero load carrying conductor, so you're extrapolating based on regression results versus minimum system is actually based on your current system design, what you're installing. So I think it's more practical. It's based on your assets that are out there, how your system is constructed currently. So I think zero intercept is much more hypothetical.
Thank you. Okay. That leads right to the next question. Can you identify any other jurisdictions where the minimum system cost of service methodology has been accepted and approved by other state commissions? Is this a common methodology?
Yeah, I would say so. I've seen it in several other jurisdictions, like where I have worked myself.
Where it's been approved? Can you identify any of the jurisdictions?
Yeah, so New York, most of the companies use minimum system. Maine, Indiana, and those are the few that come to my mind right now.
And they've been approved by those commissions?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean Eversource in Connecticut, actually. So
thank you.
Yep.
As part of that, can you identify other jurisdictions where the minimum system cost of service methodology classified certain distribution costs as partially customer and partially demand related? Would that be a true statement? And other jurisdictions have applied that same division, if you would, of this partial to demand, partial to customer. In other jurisdictions, that's also been submitted and approved by those commissions? I could restate it if I went too much.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand how that's different from your earlier question.
I'm just trying to dig in a little bit in terms of, I know there was a lot on the record in terms of certain distribution costs being submitted as partial cost to demand side, partial to customer. And there's, a lack of a better word, there's been debate about that in this proceeding. I just want to understand if that division, that allocation between demand and customer is commonplace in other jurisdictions where it's been approved. It's really a yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely yes.
Okay, I just have a general question on the levelized, excuse me, I have to ask a question. Okay, is it correct, Mr. Kulka, that the proposed rate design, you guys proposed two options here, a non-levelized and a levelized rate design in this proceeding? Is that correct?
Yes, that's at the revenue requirement level.
Okay, and can you discuss the pros and cons of a levelized rate design?
I think that's a question more appropriate for the revenue requirements panel.
Let me take a
I
figure.
will say that the levelized steps the increase smoother than the unlevelized. So you can compare the 3 years, and this is right. And once again, this is something that can be explained in detail by the revenue requirements panel. But you can observe, I think it's Schedule C 1.0 in the standard filing requirements, that, and that's where we take our retail revenues that we design rates to. You can see that the steps are even from where we are to where we need to get to, are even with the levelized, but there's a much higher step in the first year and then smaller steps in years 2 and years 3 with the unlevelized.
Okay, thank you. Let me restate the question, because I think I want to put it in a different lens, because I think you might be able to answer the question. And forgive me if I went down a rabbit hole here, but I didn't mean to. Is from a ratepayer's perspective, what the customer will experience on a levelized rate plan, I want to understand the pros and cons of that from a customer receiving the bill over a period of time that's beyond a year. Can you answer it in that way? I don't really want to dig into the revenue requirements. I appreciate what you said, but I'm really thinking of, my question's more in the line of that, trying to get that understanding a little bit better.
Certainly, and I'll bring up the term rate gradualism again from our discussion yesterday. A levelized approach is a more gradual approach. A non-levelized approach would send a more disruptive, almost being equal price signal to customers.
So, okay, thank you. And so put it another way is customers would experience under a levelized approach incremental increases that are lower over each year on a percentage basis, not all in one swoop.
Lower or higher.
Yes.
Either direction, it would be an even approach
Okay.
as opposed to a non-levelized approach, which could be high in 1 year and then lower in subsequent years, by
Okay.
example.
Thank you. And then in terms of the levelized approach, there are carrying costs that were identified in the company's application, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then I know there was an bear with me here. If you could, I was also interested in for subsequent years after the rate case, after the final year of the rate design. So could you please turn to RRU 237? I just have one quick question on that. It's related to what we're talking about.
Bear with me for one moment,
Sure.
please. You said 237?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm there.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I understand it. You mentioned that under the proposal of a 3-year plan, for year 4, the question asks, what would the rate design look like in year 4 after the 3 years? So it's a theoretical question. Assuming everything's equal and the revenues are realized with the proposed rate design. Is it correct to say that under the levelized approach, the company would have recovered the carrying costs that I just mentioned in years 2 and 3? And so in your answer, you're saying that for the 4th year, that the rates would be the non-levelized rates. So my question is that correct? It's the non-levelized.
Correct.
So in looking at the exhibits and comparing the exhibit of the e-exhibits, that non-levelized rate is the distribution usage is slightly lower under the non-levelized. So in essence, if this, say it was approved as is, in the 4th year, there would actually be a slight decrease in the distribution because it would revert to the non-levelized because in theory, any carrying costs would have been recovered. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. we would drop the revenue requirement used to calculate the rates from the year 3 levelized value, which I think is around 521 million, down to the rate year 3 unlevelized value, which is 30 to 35 million dollars less. So there would be a decrease from levelized 3 to unlevelized 4.
Okay, thank you. I just gotta grab one thing. It's right here. Jeez. But I didn't bring my book. And I'm not gonna go through the whole book, I promise. I just wanted to ask some questions. If you could turn to exhibit E-1.0A and it's page 17 of 285. It's the appendix A. I have a few questions, and I'll finish up on the miscellaneous charges. I just have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Sorry, Mr. Skarzinski, what page were you at?
Yeah, sure. It's page 17 of 285.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And this is E1-0A,
Yep.
almost there. And this is the scored tariff.
Yes, correct.
And the non-levelized can we pull that one up? Because we have a levelized and a non-levelized. So it may be dash A.
I guess the way I would characterize it, it's just the appendix on service charges, and it
Okay,
starts with
so-
supplier relations fees.
Sure, they're the same in both.
Okay, great. All right, just kind of wanted to go down the list here in terms of, first of all, are the supplier relation fees cost-based?
I'll have to defer that question to Paul Wayner, who provided that number. I believe they are cost-based, but I did not make those calculations.
Okay. Okay, let's just try to go through it, and if we need to get
Yeah, Mr. Skarzinski, we could offer up a read-in at that. Mr. Wayner was not a witness on this, but we could offer a read-in at a break. We can check, but we can go through the cross, and if there's any gaps, we can fill those in.
that'd be fine by me, if that's okay by you, Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so just kind of going down the list here, there's a supplier configuration fee, and that one looks like it went up roughly about $1,000 from the current rate. I just want to understand what is the fee for? And trying to understand, again, this would all fall under if it's cost-based.
I think perhaps maybe we should take a late file on this if we can, because these are questions that I think will supersede what we can do with a read-in.
Okay, if that's okay by you, Chairman, I'd like to get a late filed exhibit that just reflects the cost support for the supplier configuration fee. And just provide a little bit of the detail behind that. That would be fine.
Okay, that's late file exhibit 10.
Thank you. Okay. If you can go to page 19, I just have a question on the meter test. And I think this one, we're not going to need a late file. I think you can answer it. I just want to understand that the fee, the way I read the language, that is it correct to say that if a customer requests or a supplier requests a meter test, that they're allowed one free test per year annually, correct?
I believe that is correct, yes.
Okay. And the fee, if they request a subsequent meter test within a year, the way I read this, I just want to confirm, that's all this is if there's something, if the company goes out and tests the meter a second time within a year, and there's nothing wrong with the meter, that's when this fee would apply.
I believe that is correct.
Okay, but and conversely, if something is found to be wrong with the meter, customers are not billed the charge. That's really the thing I wanted to make sure is,
Correct.
okay, great. And I think that's all I have. So I want to thank the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Will Taylor from Authority staff. Sorry, we're gonna,
Madam Chair,
I'm sorry, there's a
I
few
just have
follow-ups.
one follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
So I think this is for Mr. Mermal. Mr. Skarzinski asked you several questions about the minimum system study. I was just wondering, he asked about where it's accepted in various jurisdictions, and I think in the panel's testimony, I forget where, that particular approach was discussed as being, I'm not sure if the word endorsed was used, but it's certainly part of the NARUC rate making manual.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you tell me, how does Bonbright et al., Danielson and Kermishin feel about the use of minimum system studies?
Can you, in what context?
Do you believe they support the use in rate making?
Do you have a specific reference or?
Actually, I do, if you can bear with me here. Yeah, the authors generally support the use of an MSS in functionalizing distribution costs as customer related. And I'm referring to my text, which is a 1988 version of their second edition, 1988. On the top of page 491 and extending on to 492, they discuss the appropriateness of such a study. Are you aware of whether that was sort of a positive or negative, opinion on the use of an MSS?
I do not recall that specific text, but what I do recall is on the Bonbright's original book, which he solely authored, he did have some comments around, the minimum size method in terms of how it's almost difficult to categorize it as customer related, but there is I cannot cite exactly, but he does mention that citing or classifying those as demand is even worse than classifying them as customer. So that's my recollection.
Okay. I'm not gonna ask any more on this. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll transition to additional Pura staff here. Okay, so we're gonna go for a little bit longer before we take our lunch break. So next up, we have Mr. Will Taylor on behalf of authority staff, please.
Thank you. I'm going to start with some follow-up questions to some of the interrogatories. I'll start with CAE 57.
CAE 57.
Yeah, 0057.
I have it, yes.
Okay. In response to CAE 0057, the company notes that small customers would more easily qualify for the rider if they may qualify through either a percentage increase in employee count or increased employee count rather than based on strictly an increased employee count. Is the company able to add a percentage increase staff option to the EDR if an appropriate value is determined? And does the company have a position on adding such an option?
Give me a minute, please. I'm sorry. I'm just catching up on not as fast. as Mr.
No problem.
So please restate your question about if we have a preference, and then did we do any analysis? We did not perform any analysis, but if you could please.
Sure. Yeah, I'll restate. Is the company able to add a percentage increased staff option if an appropriate value is determined? And does the company have a position on whether, or a preference, I suppose, on adding such an option to the EDR?
The first part of the question is yes. The second part, we haven't really discussed it. I would say from a design perspective, there should be a material threshold. So in this tariff proposal, the minimums we think are appropriate. If there's some sort of gradualism that could occur between steps, we believe we responded that we would be open to, and this is in the, I believe it was in a rebuttal testimony, that we would be open to a proposal.
Thank you. If the company were to implement a percentage increase in staff option to the EDR, do you believe further analysis is needed to determine the correct percentage? And if so, could you provide a ballpark estimate for cost of such analysis?
Well, as we've stated earlier, this is, although it's certainly not a pilot, it is a rate offering that is reasonably conservative, and proposed rate making is to capture the costs and benefits separately so we can evaluate at a later time the efficacy of the tariff. I don't think that any additional analysis would be necessary, and frankly, I'm not sure how you would conduct it. So I think that, in my opinion, it's a reasonable modification that could be made to this proposal without upsetting the overall intent of the ED tariff.
Thank you. I'll now move to CAE 0059. And also supplementary Schedule E 1.0-A, page 285. I'm not sure if you'll need to reference them or not in order to provide a response.
Sorry, Mr. Taylor, could you just state that? Were you talking about the e-schedule?
Yeah.
I didn't catch the whole reference.
So the question will pertain to Schedule E 1.0-A, page 285 of 285.
Thank you.
I have the response.
Okay. In Schedule E, the company proposed an 18-month demonstration period and stated that the customers would be charged back for the previous 12 months if they did not meet capital investments or employment requirements. Later, subsequently, in CA 59, the company stated a preference to align the clawback period and the demonstration period. So I was just wondering if you could provide the company's current position on demonstration period and clawback period length, if they should be aligned, and any specific lengths proposed.
After further review, we think 12 months demonstration period and a 12-month clawback alignment would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I'll now move to CAE 0066.
I have it.
We have that.
In response to CAE 0066, UI stated that subscribers subject to a chargeback period for not meeting the relevant EDR discount requirements would be eligible for payment arrangements similar to balances from other charges, and that any chargebacks recovered would be credited against program discounts, i.e. the discount amount would be reversed by the chargeback amount. I'm just looking for a clarification of this response as to whether the chargeback periods would be recovered incrementally over a time period equivalent to the demonstration period.
Depends on the nature of the payment arrangement. What do you think? Right.
That's still.
Right, but to me, logically, you would only credit it back once received. Which one answer you want me to answer? We don't think it necessarily aligns with the clawback period. If you make a payment arrangement, it'll be a unique arrangement for that particular customer. And as the funds that you're seeking to claw back are received, that would then be the time in which that would be credited to the account.
Okay, thank you. So as a quick follow-up to that, for payment arrangements, what would you expect for maybe a range of payback periods?
That's beyond the scope of what we have here. That would be a question more appropriate, I believe, for the customer service panel that makes the special payment arrangements.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll now move to CAE 0063.
Mr. Taylor, let's pause. Attorney Venora, can you give us a read-in? I think after lunch, I don't want to go too far to the customer service panel. Just on that specific question of what's the
Sure,
range.
we can, yeah, I think because Ms. Palella will be the witness on that. We'll reach out. I suspect people may be doing that right now.
Okay.
And we'll get a read in for you on I guess on the general parameters of the payment arrangements. And then maybe if there's follow-up questions, we could take it up with the customer panel. Would that be?
Of course, I understood it to be a fairly narrow question about what the average payment term lengths are for customers that would be eligible for the EDR. So just looking for a range of months.
Got it.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you. With respect to CAE 0063, the company noted that Central Maine Power has pine tree development zones, which refer to certain business sectors in which businesses can reduce state taxes when they create new quality jobs or move existing jobs into those sectors, where a new quality job is defined as one that provides a total income above the county average and includes access to a group healthcare plan and group retirement benefits. I'm curious if UI considered adding job quality requirements when developing the EDR. If not, why not? And if so, why did the EDC decide against implementing them?
So we discussed, among other terms and conditions, such things as what's outlined here. This is one of 25 ED tariffs in which we evaluated. In our view, as an introductory tariff, this was a level of detail and a level of scrutiny that we didn't think was appropriate for UI to embark upon, particularly at this point in time. As an economic development program matures, such considerations as what you see in the Pine Tree Development Zone may be more appropriate. But as an introductory tariff, we thought it would be better to be simpler to start.
Thank you. As a follow-up, do you know if it was phased in CMP or whether that was a term from the beginning of that tariff?
We don't know.
Sorry, Stephanie Cohen, authority staff. Just a quick follow-up on that. If this terms and conditions were to be added, does the company have a position on whether that's something that the company would evaluate or kind of work with the customer, or do you see that as potentially a role for an outside, a third-party entity or a government agency, for example?
Making these kind of findings and doing this kind of work is beyond what we do as a core business. So we would likely not have the in-house expertise to do this. We'd probably have to contract this out.
Are you aware of how the affiliates in Maine kind of take on this job quality perspective, if it's done in-house, third-party consultant, or perhaps by a separate entity in the state?
I'm not aware right now, but that is something we could take a late file on if.
I think we're all set for now. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. I'll now turn to CAE 0068.
Yes, I have it.
In response to this interrogatory, the company noted that the main drawback to a per employee approach as opposed to a tiered approach in an EDR is onerous administration. And UI went on to provide an example of tracking when 1 to 2 employees are added. Is the company able and potentially more willing to consider a per employee approach if a minimum and maximum were instituted, e.g. a 0.2% discount for each employee added, starting at a minimum of 10 employees with a cap at 50 employees?
Well, generally, it adds a level of complexity to the program, and it would rely on the applicant's records and how far do you want a utility company to pry into one of their customers' employee counts, right? So I think it comes down to probably an affidavit from that customer saying that they in fact have these customer increases. I think that's probably the simplest way to administer that. So there's in the design of such a program, there's a level of faith, right? The simplicity aspect of the proposal that we put forth here is that that's a one-time verification. Okay, and then my understanding is that annually you would revisit that to make sure that that customer still qualifies for that particular discount, as opposed to what I believe CAO 68 is suggesting is that the discount could potentially change year to year based on customer growth. Excuse me, employee growth. So I think that there's a difference in there that I guess in my opinion, I'm not sure how much additional value you're creating there.
Sure. So it wouldn't change year to year. It would still be a one-time assessment. I suppose the difference would be you would be providing more of a discount, say, for the addition of 35 employees versus 25, whereas the tiered implementation does not. And one could argue potentially, the benefits of such an approach. And so I was wondering more, still a one-time assessment, but per employee.
With that clarification, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
I would say that would be acceptable because to your point, you're making a one-time assessment. It's no different whether you're assessing whether it's more than 10 employees or more than 15 employees. So as long as that's not a continuous kind of process, I think that's fine.
Thank you. And just as another quick follow-up, the administration of such costs would be similar between the two approaches, or vary substantially for one or the other?
I believe so. It would be similar. We would be looking at the actual count instead of trying to put it into one of 3 blocks.
Thank you. Moving to the topic of enrollment, I was curious if the company tracks requests for new rates or if the company can otherwise speak to instances of customers reaching out to inquire about economic development rates historically.
We don't have that information available to us at this time. That again would be a question best directed to the economic development team, and we can go back with a late file if you find that useful and see what they've done.
Sure. Yeah, that would be useful, I think.
Okay, late file exhibit 11 is for the company to provide historical records regarding inquiries related to EDR rates. And let's go back 5 years. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm also curious if the company has any active special contracts, and if so, if the company can elaborate on any reasons for implementation and provide the number of special contracts that are active.
No, we have no special contracts.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, no current special contracts?
No current special
Okay.
contracts.
Okay, thank you.
And this question pertains to exhibit UI-MC /MM-1, page 15.
Take me a moment just to pull that up.
Absolutely.
Page 15.
Yes.
Yes, I'm there.
Is the intent of the proposed annual report to PURA to track the status of the employment and capital expenditures of subscribers for all 5 years of the tariff, or is it just one update per project provided at the end of the demonstration period?
Yes, sir. Our intention here is to have a program report once a year that we can report on the activity of the program that year.
Thank you. I know previously has been discussed the group that would say yay or nay to the applications. Would it be the same group who would be following up on this report annually with customers?
I expect so, with help necessary from other groups.
Okay, thank you. I have a little bit more.
Oh, go ahead.
In terms of program eligibility, there's employment as well as capital investment thresholds. And I was curious if the company considered such scenario as a company provides the requisite investment, be it $1 million, but has recently, perhaps within the last year, cut a significant number of jobs, and if such a company would still be eligible for the EDR.
Currently, as written, the availability clause contains the word or, so they're independently assessed.
So the answer is yes, that company would potentially be eligible.
That's correct.
Thank you. My last few questions have to do with the distressed municipality adder. And I'm wondering if UI expects the proposed additional distressed municipality adder to make a tangible difference in expansion in those locations. And if there's any evidence that this incentive level will lead to greater investment and job additions, or if a different level of investment may be required.
I'll answer that kind of in two parts, if I might. First, through our research, 2% seemed to be a consistent type of distressed municipality percentage. And second, again, somewhat anecdotally, but you may be familiar with the federal investment tax credit, and the new law provides a 10% additional bonus to distressed municipalities. And from our experience within our firm, we see that seems to be an attractive aspect to the federal ITC. One would think that from an economic development standpoint, it may also be attractive.
Thank you. As a follow-up, I am wondering if UI intends or would be willing to track distressed municipality deployment and ensure the incentive is enough to incentivize economic development in these areas, and potentially provide an update in the annual report on distressed municipality deployment.
The location will be tracked as part of the normal data gathering and management. So we can report, and I think it would be part of the normal report that we would report back on which projects, if any, went into distressed communities. We probably won't be able to ascertain whether there should have been more or fewer. I mean, we'll only be able to report on the program activity we have.
Understood. I think that's helpful. Thank you. If it were determined that higher incentive levels were needed, not necessarily from that information alone, would UI in the future be willing to revise the incentive levels in the EDR to provide more investment for distressed municipalities if required?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. We want to have a successful program.
Thank you. And my last question is, does UI intend to allow economic justice communities not located in distressed municipalities to be eligible for the additional adder?
That was not contemplated. There's a state of Connecticut official distressed municipality list. So that's something that the company does not have to maintain. It can be consulted. I am unaware if there is a social justice mapping area report available. So that's as far as I think I can go with that.
Thank you. Just to clarify, I think I misspoke. I meant environmental justice communities, which there are a set definition for in Connecticut as well.
If the authority thought that that was important, we could, expand it to that too.
Thank you. That concludes my question.
Okay, I think we're gonna take our lunch break. So SPEMA is 4:12. We will resume at 12:30.